All right, ready for a deep dive into a real-life courtroom drama?
Oh, I'm always up for good legal thriller, especially one with this much intrigue.
This one's a doozy. We're dealing with the murder of Ferdinand Enzo Salas Pastor, a champion race car driver in the Philippines.
Yeah, this case was huge over there.
Right.
And the court documents we dug up, they really give you a front row seat to the whole thing, the investigation, the evidence, the arguments, the works.
It's like piecing together a puzzle, except the pieces don't always fit neatly. So Enzo was shot and killed on June 12th, 2014.
Right, gunned down at an intersection. And right from the start, you have these wildly different stories about what went down that night.
Like what? Give me the rundown.
Okay, so the prosecution, they're going with a straight-up hit job. They're pointing the finger at Domingo De Guzman III, claiming he was having an affair with Enzo's wife, Dalia.
Oh, so a love triangle gone wrong? Juicy.
Totally. And their star witness is Enzo's mechanic, Paulo Salazar, who was with him that night. He claims he got a look at the gunman's face, even remembers a distinctive feature in one of his eyes.
So they've got an eyewitness who can potentially ID the shooter. Did they ever catch the guy?
They did. A police officer, PO2 Angel, confessed to the murder, saying De Guzman was the one who put him up to it.
Wow, a confession from the actual gunman. That's pretty damning. Case closed, right?
Not so fast. Here's where it gets really interesting. Angel takes back his confession, claims the cops coerced him into it.
Whoa, hold up. A coerced confession, that changes everything.
And it doesn't stop there. De Guzman and Dalia, they both deny any involvement, say they were wrongfully accused.
Okay, now I'm really hooked. We've got a disputed confession, accusations of police misconduct, a possible love triangle. This is getting good.
And we're just getting started. Then you have this guy, Alvin Nadua, enter the picture. He says he's a hitman.
A hitman? Seriously?
Yep. And wait for it. He claims De Guzman tried to hire him to kill Enzo.
You've got to be kidding me.
Nadua even says he met with De Guzman, Dalia, and some middleman to talk about the whole plot.
Oh man, this is straight out of a movie. So what did De Guzman's lawyers say about all of this?
Well, they come out swaying. They try to discredit Nadua by saying his whole story is hearsay and shouldn't be allowed in court.
It's like everyone's trying to poke holes in each other's stories.
Exactly. This whole case hinges on what evidence the courts decide to believe.
So we've got a whole lot to unpack here. Where do we even start with this tangled web of accusations and evidence?
Well, I think the logical place to start is with that disputed confession from PO2 Angel. That's a major sticking point in this whole case.
Right, because if it was coerced, like the defense is claiming, then that really throws a wrench into the prosecution's whole case. So what did De Guzman's lawyers present to back up that claim?
Well, they argue that Angel's initial arrest was bogus. They say the cops planted drugs on him.
Whoa, hold on. Planted drugs?
Yeah, they claim no drugs were ever found, even though the police report said there was a drug violation.
So they're saying the police basically fabricated the whole drug charge just to bring Angel in and force a confession out of him.
Exactly. And to support their claim, they presented a sworn statement from Angel himself where he says the police made him confess and implicate De Guzman under duress.
Okay, that's a pretty serious accusation. What did the prosecution have to say about all of that?
They countered by bringing in the lawyer who was present during Angel's confession, a guy named Adi Blumenthal. He insisted that no police officers were present when Angel was asked if he wanted to talk. Said Angel seemed relaxed and didn't act like he was being forced to say anything.
So it's a classic case of he said, she said.
Pretty much. Oh, and remember how Angel admitted to the killing on TV?
Yeah, that was wild.
Well, the defense jumped on that too. They said that shouldn't be allowed in court because it wasn't a formal interrogation.
So because it was just a TV interview, they thought it shouldn't count.
Yep. But the Supreme Court actually cited legal precedents, past cases like People v. Annan and People v. Domante, to show that confessions made to the media, especially if they seem voluntary and weren't prompted by the police, can be considered evidence.
Interesting. So even though it wasn't a formal interrogation, the court decided it was still a credible confession.
Right. And they actually compared Angel's extrajudicial confession to PO2 Guzman's recantation and ultimately found Angel's more believable.
What made them decide that?
They pointed out that Angel's confession didn't seem influenced by the cops at all. Plus, they highlighted that the police didn't even have De Guzman on their radar as a suspect until Angel named him.
Oh, that's an important detail.
Right. It's like they were trying to figure out who had more to gain or lose by changing their story.
It makes you wonder about the motivations behind these statements.
Exactly. Now let's talk about the hitman, Nadua. Remember how the defense was screaming, Hearsay?
Oh, yeah, they were trying to throw out his whole testimony, weren't they? So how did the courts handle that?
Well, the Court of Appeals decided to believe Ndua.
Really? Why is that?
They thought his story was actually more believable because he was a known gun for hire. I mean, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
This is the guy's line of work.
Right, it's not like he's just some random guy making stuff up. But what about the hearsay part? Specifically, De Guzman's lawyers argued that Ndua's statements about Dalia's involvement were basically just rumors.
True, there was a big point of contention, but the court took a broader view of the whole thing. They basically said that even if Dalia never explicitly told Angel where to find Enzo, the fact that she was constantly keeping tabs on his whereabouts and feeding that info to De Guzman was pretty fishy.
So it's not just about one single piece of evidence, but rather the pattern of behavior that started to emerge.
Right, exactly. Like all these little details start to paint a picture. And get this, to make their case even stronger. The court pointed out that De Guzman was the one who gave the order to kill Enzo.
Oh, so they're highlighting his central role in all of this.
Yep, and they even brought up Dalia's attempt to pay Ndua more money after he initially turned down the job.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that part.
That detail, along with Ndua's confirmation that he met with both De Guzman and Dalia, really strengthened the prosecution's case against her, even though she wasn't at the meeting with Angel.
So it sounds like they were really looking at all the pieces of the puzzle, not just the ones that fit their initial assumptions.
Exactly. They were trying to see the bigger picture. The Court of Appeals even said that even though Ndua didn't actually pull the trigger, his involvement in the early stages of the plot makes it more likely that De Guzman really did have a reason to want Enzo dead.
And we know that Enzo was allegedly abusive towards Dalia, which gives De Guzman a possible motive, right?
Exactly. And that's a key point. It's about connecting the dots between motive and opportunity and this alleged conspiracy.
So even without that undeniable gotcha moment, the courts are still building a case based on patterns of behavior and all those seemingly small details that point to something bigger. So we've laid out all this evidence, but De Guzman's lawyers argued it wasn't enough to keep him locked up. What were their main arguments for granting him bail?
Well, they basically went back to that recanted confession from PO2 Angel. They said with that out of the picture, the prosecution's case was on shaky ground.
Because it was all circumstantial. Right. They didn't have any direct evidence tying De Guzman to the murder.
Exactly. They were implying that the whole thing was built on hearsay and speculation.
So what did the courts say to that? I mean, they ultimately decided to deny De Guzman bail, didn't they?
They did. Both the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court said that even though the evidence was circumstantial, it was still strong enough to justify keeping De Guzman in custody.
So even without that so-called smoking gun, the courts felt there was enough to suggest De Guzman's involvement.
Right. They kept coming back to his alleged affair with Dalia, Enzo's history of abusive behavior, and those attempts to hire multiple hitmen, Ndua being one of them. To them, it all pointed to motive.
It seems like they were looking at the bigger picture, not just focusing on whether or not there was a direct link.
Exactly. They determined that the combined weight of all those circumstances was enough to establish probable cause.
And just so everyone's clear, probable cause doesn't necessarily mean someone's guilty, right? It just means there's enough evidence to move forward with a trial.
You got it. It's a much lower standard than proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. At that stage, it's simply about showing that it's reasonable to believe a crime was committed and that the accused person was likely involved.
And to be clear, Dalia's case was initially dismissed due to lack of probable cause, but that doesn't mean she's off the hook, does it?
Definitely not. The Supreme Court actually reinstated that arrest warrant for Dalia and issued a whole departure order, which means they're not done with her yet. They clearly think there's more to investigate there.
Man, what a wild ride. This case is a perfect example of how messy and complex these legal battles can get. Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that justice is rarely simple. It often involves navigating these murky waters of circumstantial evidence, conflicting stories, and legal technicalities. And sometimes, even with a Supreme Court ruling, we're left with more questions than answers.
Like, what about those other individuals mentioned in the documents? Could there be more to their involvement than meets the eye? Or what if new evidence comes to light that changes everything?
Exactly. Cases like this remind us that the search for truth is rarely a straight line. It's an ongoing process, and sometimes that means questioning everything and accepting that we may never have all the answers.
That's the thing about these deep dives. They really get you thinking. And who knows, maybe out there, someone listening has a piece of the puzzle that can shed new light on this whole thing.